Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 3rd of March of 2025. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the United States of America. This morning started not very good for Ukraine because different representatives of the United States of America made lots of very interesting statements regarding Ukraine. Several statements were made by Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State. Several statements were made by the Speaker of the House of the Representatives, Johnson, and several statements were made by the US Secretary of Treasury. And most of them were that Ukraine will not receive even a single dollar in the future. Ukraine will not get anything from the United States of America until Zelensky changes his opinion regarding peace, regarding the settlement of the conflict, and until Zelensky signs the agreement between the USA and Ukraine regarding the rare metals. So all these things were made in the morning of the 3rd of March of 2025 according to Ukrainian time, but by the evening of Ukrainian time, or maybe in the early morning of the US time, Donald Trump made probably the most important statement, or not statement, but he posted a very interesting article in his social network saying that tomorrow night will be big. I will tell it like it is. Obviously very interesting, and the thing is that nobody knows for sure what exactly Donald Trump is planning to talk about. Some sources are saying that maybe tomorrow Trump will make several statements regarding Ukraine, regarding the settlement of the conflict. Other people are saying that maybe Donald Trump is going to talk about something else. Maybe he's going to probably announce the meeting and talks with Vladimir Putin. Maybe tomorrow at night of the 4th of March, Trump will have a meeting with Putin somewhere in Saudi Arabia. Maybe tomorrow Trump is going to include Canada as the 51st state. Maybe Trump is going to do the same with Greenland. Maybe tomorrow Trump is going to declare war to the narco cartels on the territory of Mexico. Nobody knows what exactly Trump is going to talk about, but obviously everybody is interested, and now everybody is looking forward to this meeting, to this speech, because obviously this is going to be very interesting. And if you ask my opinion, I believe that Trump made old poker trick. He's bluffing, and now he's trying to understand by the reaction of different world politicals, or whether they have good cards or not, to understand whether the United States America and Trump personally need to continue this game. Now let's move to London. We have lots of very interesting updates from the United Kingdom. According to information we have, the most important is that Zelensky is not going to go anywhere. If you want him to move him from his position, first of all you need to negotiate with him, and obviously that's a lot of money. But this is not the most important. The most important is coming from Britain and France, and they proposed a 1 month partial ceasefire in Ukraine. Let's discuss in details. So the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Keir Starmer, stated that a 1 month partial ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine is expected to cover air, sea and energy attacks, but will not include ground combat, the French President and Foreign Minister said. European authorities say a temporary ceasefire will help assess how faithfully the President is fulfilling his obligations. They are talking about Putin, of course. However, it is still unclear what the second stage of the partial ceasefire will look like. On Monday, Macron spoke about introducing troops at this stage, but on Monday, British Defense Secretary Poland did not confirm these plans. In addition, economists who advised the parties have calculated that all the measures taken to organize European peace will cost European Union a pretty penny and will amount up to about 400 billion euros. So this 1 month partial ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine is very interesting, and if this is the real plan, because you know that by the evening of the 3rd of March we got lots of statements from different European politicals who suggested Zelensky to make an act of goodwill. They suggested him to declare, to announce this ceasefire, one-sided ceasefire just from Ukrainian side, and then the Europeans and the world leaders will take a look what Putin is going to do with this. But let's discuss this 1 month partial ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine in details. First of all, and once again, this plan is expected to cover air, sea and energy attacks. So what does it mean, air, sea and energy attacks for both sides, for the Russians and for the Ukrainians? For example, when talking about the Ukrainians, I'm not sure when exactly the Ukrainians attack deep inside of the territory of Russia, because maybe the Ukrainians attacked, but I'm not sure what kind of missiles they were using. Obviously, the Ukrainians, when attacking deep inside the territory of Russia, haven't been using missiles like ATACMS or Storm Shadow or Scalp. Maybe they were using some multiple launch rocket systems and that's it. Maybe they were using some Hammer systems, but that's it. So which means that if Ukraine announced ceasefire on attacks for Ukraine, it will mean nothing, because the Ukrainians stopped attacking deep inside of territory of Russia. Probably the Western countries decided to prevent the escalation, another round of escalation. So for Ukraine it means nothing, but when talking about Russia, if they stop attacking deep inside the territory again using missiles, this will allow the Ukrainians to be able to accumulate additional forces, to bring additional reinforcements, probably to recover and to restore their energy facilities, their probably positions, maybe training centers and many other things. Now let's discuss the attacks on the energy facilities. When talking about Ukraine, since the beginning of this year, indeed the Ukrainians made lots of attempts using drones to attack Russian oil facilities and oil refineries, and as a result of those attacks, a lot of oil facilities were destroyed. But when talking about Russia, I still don't see any consequences of those Ukrainian attacks. Maybe the Ukrainians managed to deal some damage, but obviously this situation didn't change anything. We can say that maybe the Russians even managed to learn some lessons from this situation, and the Russians found a solution and managed to improve their defense around these facilities. So from this perspective, the Russians managed to get something. And anyway, when talking about this ceasefire on this type of attack, if Ukraine stop these attacks, this will change nothing. This will change nothing in this conflict. But when talking about the Russian side, if the Russians stop attacking the deep inside the territory of Ukraine, stop attacking Ukraine energy facilities, this will lead probably to normalization of the situation in the energy sphere in Ukraine. This is the first thing. And the second thing, I'll remind you that after the conflict in the Oval Cabinet, the United States of America reported that they're not planning to restore Ukrainian energy facilities anymore. They're not planning to give any money for this, and they're not going to do anything with this if the Russians, after another attack, let's say create another blackout for Ukraine. So once again, if Ukraine stop attacking energy facilities, it will not change anything for Ukraine. But if Russia stops, this can lead to significant improvement of Ukrainian positions and so on. Now let's discuss the situation in the sea. One of the ceasefire is to stop attacking each other through sea. When talking about the current situation, since the beginning of 2025, the Russians made lots of attacks on Odessa and the Odessa regions. There were a lot of explosions on the territory of the settlement of Reni that is located on the river of Dunabi. There were several explosions and several attacks on Ukrainian positions on the territory of the port city of Izmail. A lots of ships, lots of probably warehouses were destroyed by the Russians. For example, several days ago, the Russians carried out another attack, and that was something new. For example, this was published by Daily Mail. Putin unleashes Iskander M missile attack to sink container ship in Odessa carrying cargo of British weapons for Ukraine. The British are furious that their weapons, including tea slurping trainers, have been attacked. This is so unsportsmanlike of Putin. That was stated by Daily Mail. So as you can see, the Russians began attacking not just ports and infrastructure. The Russians began attacking ships in the sea. That's most likely, according to Russia, were bring weapons to Ukraine. So when talking about this part, of course, Ukrainians basically stop attacking the territory of Crimea. Basically, they can't even bring forces to the shore of the Black Sea, because if they do this, the Russians destroy them immediately with Iskander. So Russian intelligence worked perfectly in this part of Ukraine. So Ukrainians, I don't remember when exactly the Ukrainians the last time attacked Crimea. Maybe not even in this year. But when talking about Russia, they're attacking Ukraine through the sea every single day. today, which means that if Ukraine announce ceasefire on this type of attack, basically Ukraine will not lose anything. But when talking about the Russian side, of course, Ukrainians will be able to probably restore their munitions, warehouses, ammo depots, their military potential, their military capabilities. And there is a forced, let's say, cessation of fire as a forced discussion, forced type of fight, of attacks. We are talking about ground attacks. And according to this 1 month partial ceasefire, this ceasefire will not include ground combat, which means that the forces will be able to continue battle along the line of combat contact. When talking about this thing, we understand that Ukrainians are not going to stop. They're going to continue fighting with Russia, but this ceasefire, this announcement of this ceasefire will allow the Ukrainians at least to restore their warehouses, ammo depots, their forces. So it looks like Zelensky is going to announce ceasefire from the Ukrainian side as a step of a goodwill, but basically Ukraine will not change anything in their approach of war with Russia. But this will allow Western countries, European countries, Zelensky himself to blame Putin that he is not going to do the same. And obviously Russia will never accept this formula of ceasefire, because in this case the Russians will be forced to reduce their possibilities, but Ukraine will not do anything, and this will allow Ukrainians in the months to restore their possibilities before probably Russian major offensive operation. Anyway, let's wait and see what the Russians are going to do with this, but something tells me that the Russians are going to refuse. Now let's discuss, or at least they will give their own demands regarding this question. Now let's move to the line of combat contact. We have a lots of very interesting updates, and the most important is that today we got the first two locations that confirm the Russian presence on the territory of Sumy region. And this event happened in the area of Zhuravka. The Ukrainians FPV drone or attack Russian soldier exactly in this point. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map and we have colored the northern part of Zhuravka in Russian favor. So this is the first proof that confirms Russian control and that the Russians are already on the territory of Sumy. Today, several sources reported Russian control over the settlement of Novinka, but still without any geolocations that can confirm this. Furthermore, the Russians established complete FPV drone control over the main supply lines. The road NO7 is under complete Russian control. The Ukrainian suffers huge losses. More than 33% of vehicles that use this road was already destroyed by the Russians, and these numbers are rising. Furthermore, the Russians established another FPV drone control or artillery control over another road between Ukraine and the territory of Guiva. In this video, we can see how two vehicles were trying to probably bring some forces or reinforcements to the line of combat contact. Maybe they were bringing some food or weapons, but the Russians began bombing and attacking this road, and several vehicles were damaged. This event took place exactly in this area. Once again, every single road that goes in the direction of Sudzha is already under complete Russian control. The Ukrainians suffers huge losses. As for the northern direction, there are very heavy clashes for the settlement of Malaya Loknya. The Russians are attacking this territory with FPV drones, trying to find and hunt Ukrainians. Almost every single building in this area was already reduced to ruins, but there are still Ukrainians. Furthermore, the Russian sources published the video with a soldier who raised Russian flag in this part in the settlement of Novaya Sorochina. This video confirms Russian control over this territory. So as for all these things, everything, we understand everything what is happening, but today we got another very important video that took place on the territory of Makhnovka. As you can see, we have added small polygon, small area in this part, and video is very interesting. This video was published by the 78th Separate Storm Assault Regiment, and in this video we can see how the Ukrainians managed to discover a group of forces of the armored force of Russian Federation, and then Ukrainians attacked the Russians with FPV drone. These buildings, this video was geolocated immediately, and this is exactly the area where the Ukrainians were attacking the Russians. Russians. And now we have questions how exactly the Russians managed to get there, how exactly the Russians captured these buildings, and why the Ukrainians were attacking them. So yesterday in the evening there were several reports from the Ukrainian sources that the Russians somehow managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt, that the situation is very difficult, and that in the very near future the sources will publish first geolocations and first videos will confirm Russian breakthrough. And most likely the Ukrainians were talking about this episode, how the Ukrainians were happy withdrawing the Russians in this point. As for now, we don't know for sure how exactly the Russians managed to get there. Maybe the Russians captured and attacked and captured this territory using these roads of attack. Maybe the Russians were attacking this territory from the west. We don't know for sure. So that's why, as for now, we're going to keep this area as is until we get additional clarifications to understand how the Russians managed to re-answer the settlement of Makhnovka. Anyway, this video confirms that the situation for the Ukrainians is very difficult, and that currently maybe the Russians already established complete control over the territories inside of this red line. If this information is correct, this is going to be a very huge disaster for the armed force of Ukraine. Now let's move further. Let's discuss the situation in the Kharkiv area. Today the Ukrainian sources published very interesting video from the borders. This territory in the area of Nekhotievka used to be under complete Ukrainian control, and through this area the Ukrainians in the past made lots of attempts to enter the Belgorod direction in the Kharkiv area, and today the Ukrainian sources published the video how they were bombing and attacking the territory of Ukraine, basically confirming that this territory used to be was captured by the Russians. Based on this video, made small adjustments. Maybe the Russian sabotage and reconnaissance group entered this territory with the purpose to understand and to check the situation in this area. Maybe the Russians are planning to begin another major offensive operation with the purpose to cut the city of Sumy from supply and support from the city of Kharkiv. As for the northern Kupiansk direction, during the previous 24 hours, according to different sources, the Ukrainians managed to restore control over the northeastern part of the city of Kupiansk. The Ukrainians are continuing their offensive operation, and currently the Ukrainians are trying to move further and get deeper between the settlement of Liman Первый, Sinkovka, and the Russian positions on the Ukrainian side of the river of Oskol. If the Ukrainians are able to restore control over these territories, and if the Ukrainians are able to cut the Russians on the Ukrainian side of the river from supply and support, then most likely we should expect several counterattacks from, for example, the settlement of Doroshovka towards Zapadne, and for example from the settlement of Kutkovka towards the settlement of Dvorichna. So most likely the Ukrainians are planning to counterattack the Russians with the purpose to force them to fall back. Obviously we are entering the final stage, probably the decisive stage of the battle for Kupiansk. Who wins this battle most likely is going to win the entire battle for city of Kupiansk. While the Ukrainians are trying to counterattack the Russians in the northern part, the Russians resume their attempts to attack the Ukrainians on the line Zagryzovo and further in the direction of Borova. And during the previous 24 hours, according to different sources, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly. This information was provided us by pro-Ukrainian sources. Currently, we see that most of the settlement of Zagryzovo is already located in the gray zone or inside of contested area. If the Russians continue the same way, most likely the village of Zagryzovo would be captured by the Russians. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians launched another offensive operation on the line between Rodgorodka and Nadiivka. As for this direction, the Russians are trying to get and to attack the settlement of Cherneshina. And not just the settlement of Cherneshina, this is not the primary target. The primary target for the Russians is to take under control the settlement of Novoyegorovka. So basically to establish complete control over LPR, Lugansk People Republic. To take this region under complete control, the Russians need to take the settlement of Novoyegorovka, so this area, and also the Russians need to establish complete control over the settlement of that's it probably. Yes, this is the last village that the Russians need to take under control, and then they will be able to announce that LPR was completely recaptured by the Russians. So not much left. Of course, there are still lots of job, but most likely this is like the Russian target. Media victory, and that's it. And Grekovka, so this is another village left for the Russians, but as for this direction, most likely there are still lots of job to do, but we believe that this is exactly what the Russians are going to start doing in the very near future. LPR to restore complete control over LPR. This might be a big, significant immediate victory for the Russian forces. As for this direction, we see certain activities, and we see that the Russians began moving already in this direction because, according to information we have, the Russians improved their positions to the west of Novolyubivka. Furthermore, the Russians continue bombing and attacking the northern Donetsk region with the purpose to reduce Ukrainian possibilities, their defenses, on the way to the city of Liman. As for the Sivas direction, during the previous 24 hours, we got lots of videos. The Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions, the temporary deployment points. Most of all, mainly the Russians were trying to hunt to discover the positions of Ukrainian FPV drone operators. This is very important because this is the only force, the only power Ukrainians have that can slow the Russians down. So, during the previous 24 hours, several temporary deployment points of FPV drone operators were destroyed on the territory of Siversk itself. Some of them were destroyed to the north of the city in industrial complex. In this video, we can see attack with Gerань. As a result of this attack, another base of FPV drone operators of the Armored Forces of Ukraine was destroyed. If the Russians managed to get results during these attacks, so most likely we should expect another Russian offensive, which most likely is going to have on the eve of the 7th of the European Union summit that is going to take place on the 6th of March. So we expect that on the 4th, on the 5th, and on the 6th of March, there are going to be very powerful Russian offensives carried out along the entire line of combat contact. Most likely, Ukrainian side will try to do the same with the purpose to slow down the Russians and to show the Western countries and the European unions that Ukraine still have possibilities. Now let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction. According to information we have, the Russians managed to restore control over the settlement of Peshane. Obviously, this is very powerful. And furthermore, the Russians managed to improve their positions in the South Donetsk direction. Today, we got several geolocations that confirm Russian control over the settlement of Privilne. This video was published by the forces of the 141st Mechanized Brigade, and here we can see Ukrainian FPV drone attacks on the Russian units and positions inside of the settlement. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map. These territories used to be considered as a gray zone or contested area. Now we have no doubts that there are Russian soldiers on the territory of this village. Furthermore, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians increased their concentration of attacks on the settlement of Kamar. This is the main village that Ukrainians use to supply and support their forces in this direction. The Russians established complete fire control over the main logistic with the purpose to defeat the Ukrainians there. Furthermore, we continue receiving lots of updates from the Zaporozhye direction. During the previous night, we got lots of videos of how the Russians were bombing the settlement of Gulyai Polye, and the Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions in the area of Zaporozhye. Furthermore, several sources reported that the Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to improve their positions significantly towards the villages of Mali Shirbaki and Shirbaki itself. Currently, it's very difficult to understand whether the Russians have already begun offensive operation or it's just attempt to distract Ukrainian attention and to force them to keep some soldiers in this area. It's now very difficult to understand. Anyway, let's wait and see what Trump is going to tell us tomorrow on the evening of the 2nd of Tuesday. Obviously, this is going to be very interesting. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day.